Hello, Alex Ray. I thought I would make a quick video to answer your question, or try to answer your question. I find that videos are a lot more informative generally than just a quick sentence or two. So in your question, you were doing this basically. You had your stage 2. You had your stage 2 plan on this side, and over here on the right side you were going into maneuver mode, and you were kind of taking your prograde and putting that value here, and then you would go to outward and change plane, and you would input those here and here, and that's actually not what you want to do. Do this instead. On your left side, go back to stage 1 and press VW until you get over to the escape plan, and you'll notice down here that you have the delta V. And this delta V is I don't want to say it's a total of your prograde velocity, of your prograde outward and plane change, because that's not entirely accurate, but in some sense it's a total of those three. So have that on this side, your escape plan, and then on the right side, set up your maneuver. And I say do it that way just because I think it makes sense. At least if you're English, we read left to right. So over here on the right side, then you just input this delta V as your prograde, and that's actually all you do. So I'll show you here. If I just press the enter button, I can type in that number, which is 3697. And again, I'm getting that number from right here. It says delta V, so I'm just putting that number in exactly as it is. And we don't do anything for outward. We don't do anything for plane change. Now you'll notice that we do in fact have a hyperbolic trajectory. So the second step in setting this up is to then go to your date variable. And you don't want to copy whatever date that you had in your escape plan. Don't worry about that. What we're going to do here is we're actually just going to kind of push this forward until it lays over top of that as closely as we can. So I'm just going to go backwards to a less sensitive setting and bring it around. And it's pretty close there, but let's go down to a hyper setting, just get it even more accurate than that. And I would say that's pretty good right there. Once you have that set up, then you can go forward, really on either side, it doesn't matter. And we can now go through our eject plan and start canceling out these numbers. So let's, on this side, we'll go back to reset. And now we'll come around to the prograde and we'll do the same thing, we'll reset that. And if you have anything for outward, then you would reset that as well. Once you have that done, we can then, something I like to do is to actually go into setup and then change the graph projection from plan to focus, because it just makes more sense to me to see it like this. But now we can have that on that side. We can go forward over here until we view our closest approach, and we can see that our closest approach is clearly way off. So with stage 2 on this side, I'm then going to bring up the maneuver view on this side, and again, that's because I read left to right. It just makes sense to me to input the variables on the left side and see the changes on the right side, but it really doesn't matter which way you do it. So we can start mainly here just by looking at the date a little bit. We're already at a hyper setting, so let's just put in a little bit more date or a little bit less and see what happens to the closest approach. I can see if I put in a little bit more, it's going up. That's not what we want. So let's just take out a little bit and bring that down to a lower number than what we currently have. And you can see that closest approach is coming way down just by doing the burn a little bit sooner. And somewhere around here is about as low as that's going to get. Now I'm going to go through the other variables, and every time I come across the update, I do an update. And we can come through the other variables and just start dialing this in a little bit better. Let's go down to maybe a super setting on the velocity here and just put in some prograde. That's helping. So let's go to a fine setting. Let's put in some more. And you can see that's coming way down. Let's now go to a super setting. It's kind of starting to climb back up. So once it hits this point where we've gotten as good as we can get, then I like to go back to the date variable, and we can just play with this a little bit more, plus or minus, to see what helps us out. We can see here going plus is helping, so let's just kind of do that until it reaches a point where it won't do any better. And now we just go through the different variables and just keep changing things until the closest approach is a nice low number. So let's just do a little bit more with prograde. Okay, we can see we're not getting a whole lot of benefit out of that now. So let's see what plane change does for us. Immediately go down to like a fine setting. Well, maybe not fine, maybe medium. And that's having some small impact, but it's not really doing much. So, well, actually maybe it will. Let's actually just go ahead and reset that and see what we can get with outward instead. So I'll go to a fine setting here with outward. Actually, we'll go back to medium here, and we'll just put in a little bit of negative outward. That's clearly helping a little bit. And now we'll go through the other variables as well, maybe prograde again. And that's not helping. Let's go the other way with it. And that's gotten to a point where it's not doing anything more. So back to the date, and that's not doing it, and that's not doing it. So we get to this point where as you add in date or prograde, it seems like no matter what you do, it's not helping. So this is an issue where you get into this, what me and Dimitri refer to as like TransX intuition or IMFD intuition. So in order to get this to go any lower, we're going to have to overshoot this number in one direction or the other and then fix it with a different variable. And I'll show you what I mean. So right now, as I add in a little bit of time, which means I'm going to do the burn a little bit later, I can see that the closest approach is actually climbing. So I'm going to go ahead and let that happen. I'm going to let it go out to 1.5. Then I'm going to come back with a different variable, say prograde. And as I add in some additional prograde, I can see that the closest approach is coming down overall. So now I'm going to do the same thing with prograde. I'm going to take it out to say like 1.5, 1.6, good enough. And then I'm going to come back with the date variable. And you'll notice that as I add in some additional date, it's bringing the number down more overall. So I'm going to do that again with date. Go out to say maybe 1.3 this time or something like that. Now go to the prograde, and we'll see if we can bring it down even more with prograde, and you can see we did. And you just have to kind of go back and forth with the variables like that. So this time we'll go to like 1. Now back to the date variable, and you can see eventually it's going to bring it all the way down. And also, once the closest approach gets down enough, you can actually go forward out to stage 3 and view the encounter on this side to have a better look at what your actual approach to the planet's going to be. Currently, our closest approach isn't good enough, so we actually want to continue viewing stage 2 on this side until we can bring the closest approach down even more. So let's go ahead and just kind of work with that a little bit more. Again, I'm overshooting in that direction. Now we'll come back with prograde just to see if we can bring it down. Now it's down into the 600s and 500s. And now we can actually view the encounter on this side. And this is preferable once you get down to a certain point because you have more information to work with over here than you do here, because you can tell the closest approach, it's just rough, it's not exact. Whereas with the encounter view, it's a little bit more precise. And plus we can see our trajectory coming out to Mars, and it gives us a better idea of which way to work the variables. So now that I've got this approach close enough that I can see it in the encounter view, I'm just going to continue working with the variables until I get everything down as low as I can. And I can tell here that my plane change needs some work. Now, plane change is something we could actually save until we were doing a mid-course correction, but if we want to, we can incorporate some plane change into our burn here at Earth to bring that down. And clearly we're missing Mars up or down, so let's put in just a little bit of plane change to see what we need. Let's go the other way with it. And this just wasn't a good launch from begin with, and that's not really having much impact, so let's just reset that. And let's just continue working with the other variables here a little bit. Again, every time I come around to the update, I always hit that plus button because you can see that things update when we do that. Let's go back to prograde here for a moment and just put in some additional prograde. And it overshot, and once you go out too far with it, you can see you lose the information on the encounter view. If that happens, you can either come back a little bit this way to get the information back, or you can go back to stage 2 and view the closest approach here. Let's just continue working with this though. Let's see if we can dial that down. I saw 400 there. So let's go, actually I'm going to go back this stage so I can tell which way it's helping. There we go. And now as I go forward, I'm going to overshoot this way a little bit, go out to maybe 535 and come back with the date. And now we're down, you know, down close to 300. So now, again, just back and forth until we have a closest approach that we're happy with. And really, we could go with this and we would get to Mars just fine. But if we would like to be more precise here from Earth, then we just have to play with these variables a lot. Out to 532, now we'll come back again with the date, and you can see now I saw 285 there. So you can see we're slowly working our way down. And here at this point, if we want, we can even start seeing if we can do a little bit more with outward one way or the other. That's obviously helping, that's bringing us in closer. That's having a much better impact on our trajectory at this point. So let's go back to prograde, and let's just see if we can get ourselves down to the surface basically. That's the wrong way there. And we're really close, things are getting sensitive, so I'm going down to a more tighter setting at this point. And again over to date. And date's getting a bit too sensitive at this point, so we're not going to do anything more with date. Because most likely the version of TransX that you're using won't have that micro setting. So so when date gets this sensitive, you don't want to do anything more with it. We'll be able to get the rest of it just with outward and prograde, in theory. Okay, so we'll go that way. That might have been the wrong way, but let me check with outward. Okay, we're down to 20, 18, 16. Go a little bit more that way with it, kind of overshooting in this direction. And now back to prograde. And we're almost down to the surface. So just a couple more bumps in each direction and we'll have it. Almost there. You can see we're only 1,000 kilometers up now. That's very close. Again, we could actually fly this just as it is, but just to show you that you can get it all the way down. And it's really close, but let's go back to outward one more time. Down to 373 kilometers. That's basically orbital altitude. Let's go down a little bit more. And there we are. We're impacting Mars at this point. This would actually be a crash course. Now, of course, this particular maneuver won't hold all the way to Mars. There will be quite a bit of an inaccuracy. It will require a mid-course correction of some kind, but that's just to show that you can in fact get your altitude according to TransX all the way down, touching the surface or even impacting. Once you have that set up, you're ready to fly the plan. Just come over to VW on this side, get your X lined up how you normally would.
Rotation.
It's basically going to be a prograde maneuver for the most part, so we can go prograde. And you can see we're only 300 seconds out from the time to do the burn. So let's warp time forward a little bit, get closer to the time to do the burn. And get that X centered up. And from there, I assume you know what to do. Just, you know, burn the engines when the begin burn hits 0. Of course, get your X lined up. And let me just do this real quick just to show the outcome of the burn. So just bear with me one moment. Okay, we'll warp time forward here to get down to the 0 point on the begin burn. And you'll notice when the burn's done, we will have a bit of an accuracy here, but we'll do what we can. Okay, burning, and going to warp time forward to get through this burn more quickly. Just bear with me while I do the burn. It takes a little bit of focus and concentration because it's not IMFD, which does everything for you. And about halfway through the burn, something like that. Okay, getting down toward the end of the burn. Come back to real time for a moment. And center up that X a bit better. And generally, when I get toward the end of these burns, like down to 100 meters a second remaining, I like to back off the main engines because the last little bit goes by quite fast and you might overshoot, and that requires a bit of correction after the burn, and that's a little sloppy. So preferable if you can avoid that. Just trying to keep that X centered up. It gets more sensitive as we get down toward the end of the burn. So now we're down to less than 100 meters a second. I'm going to cut the engines back a bit. And X is getting away from me. We'll go with that. And VW over to maneuver, of course. Turn maneuver mode off, and then we'll be able to see how our burn actually ended up, and it wasn't so hot. So let's back up on this side, and we can see that our closest approach is currently showing 800 kilometers out. So with translation we can fix that. You can see that's coming down quickly. Now we can go forward on this side so we can actually view the encounter, and just with a little bit of translation we can clean up that burn as needed. And that's probably about as good as it's going to get, because I have non-spherical gravity sources enabled, so you can see that this is changing very rapidly, and I'm not going to get down to a point where this is going to say that it's got a minimum altitude of 300 kilometers and holding, because you can just see how quickly that's changing. So that's it. I hope it helped out, and if you have any questions, let me know. Thanks. Hello, Alex Ray. I thought I would make a quick video to answer your question, or try to answer your question. I find that videos are a lot more informative generally than just a quick sentence or two. So in your question, you were doing this basically. You had your stage 2. You had your stage 2 plan on this side, and over here on the right side you were going into maneuver mode, and you were kind of taking your prograde and putting that value here, and then you would go to it around, and it's pretty close there, but let's go down to a hyper setting, just get it even more accurate than that, and I would say that's pretty good right there. Once you have that set up, then you can go forward, really on either side, it doesn't matter, and we can now go through our eject plan and start canceling out these numbers. So let's, on this side, we'll go back to reset, and now we'll come around to the prograde and we'll do the same thing. We'll reset that, and if you have anything for outward, then you would reset that as well. Once you have it exactly as it is, and we don't do anything for outward, we don't do anything for plane change. Now you'll notice that we do in fact have a hyperbolic trajectory. So the second step in setting this up is to then go to your date variable, and you don't want to copy whatever date that you had in your escape plan. Don't worry about that. What we're going to do here is we're actually just going to kind of push this forward until it lays over top of that as closely as we can. So I'm just going to go backwards to a less sensitive setting and bring it outward and change plane, and you would input those here and here, and that's actually not what you want to do. Do this instead. On your left side, go back to stage 1 and press VW until you get over to the escape plan. And you'll notice down here that you have the delta V, and this delta V is a, I don't want to say it's a total of your prograde velocity, of your prograde outward and plane change, because that's not entirely accurate, but in some sense it's a total of those three. So have that on this side, your escape plan, and then on the right side, you know, set up your maneuver. And I say do it that way just because I think it makes sense, at least if you're English, we read left to right. So over here on the right side, then you just input this delta V as your prograde, and that's actually all you do. So I'll show you here. If I just press the enter button, I can type in that number, which is 3697. And again, I'm getting that number from right here. It says delta V, so I'm just putting that number in.